Welcome to our City Builders discussion, and I'm Mark Nikita.
I'm Dorian Moore.
And we are here to discuss all the great things that make cities good, bad, and ugly, or positive, or great, or whatever you say, and maybe all the above. But today we're going to talk about non-motorized systems for a few minutes and alternative mobility other than the sort of common cars and transit and walking, but we'd like to talk about typically the two-wheel version, although there are three wheels and four wheels as well of non-motorized systems.
Right, but what we're seeing and what prompted this, what we're seeing worldwide is that non-motorized travel, walking, biking, alternative modes of mobility is becoming front and center for city building in all cities around the world. And so we think it's an important part of the next phase of development for our urban centers. We've seen this grow and grow over the last decade and a half in cities that we visited worldwide, from Amsterdam to Montreal to here in our hometown of Detroit. So these are some exciting times if you're someone who wants an alternative to the automobile.
Yeah, I think the thing that we've recognized is the growth in non-motorized activity has been, I guess, really ramping up in North America. But as we've studied cities around the world, biking in a lot of places has been pretty prominent for many years and even decades. I mean, going back to our early days of going to places like the Netherlands and other parts of Europe, especially like Denmark, very prominent, and in Asia as well. I mean, I remember my first trip to China years ago, and this was in the 90s, and biking was very prominent. I think it was because of the lack of cars at the time. There were a lot less cars and a lot more people taking bikes and other modes of transit. So different parts of the world, I think, have really embraced biking as an alternative. But in North America, it has really ramped up in the last, 15 years to 20 years at the most, and very rapidly now, and accelerated with the COVID situation.
And COVID took bicycling, for instance, from being a recreation to a necessary mode of transit. And I think that's one of the things that we have to keep in mind, is that at least in North America, and speaking specifically about Canada and the US, we found that when most people were doing their biking, they were doing it for exercise. Whereas today, that's transitioned, where we've just about caught up with the rest of the world and really look at biking as a primary form of transportation to get to work, to get to meetings, to get to shopping, to get to recreating. So I think there's these options that have come up, and we're seeing the bicycle as an important element in non-motorized travel.
I think one of the things that we've really noticed is the difference in North America, specifically in the U.S. For many, many years, I think biking was almost completely recreationally oriented. It seemed like people would go biking if they wanted, a weekend day, you want to go for a ride somewhere. I mean, it's really about recreation. And even as kids growing up, it seemed like biking was all about just sort of having fun and just going out and riding around the neighborhood with your friends, whatever. And I think that was largely going out for exercise, things like that was really the essence of bike riding. But I think that transition has definitely happened in North America, where biking is far beyond just recreation and just exercise. It's become a mode of transportation. And that's really where the mindset is in a lot of other parts of the world. It's truly an option to get around, to do your, to go to the grocery store, to go to work, to go to a friend's house, go out to dinner, whatever, you to actually take your bike to do those things. Not something that our mindset was really set in in the United States for the longest time. In Canada, I think for sure.
Right.
It seems like Canada's moved a little bit before us to some degree, especially a place like Montreal, where they really embraced it. I think.
Yep.
And Toronto now has really embraced it, especially with COVID. Our experience in Toronto as another home base of ours is such that we've been monitoring the amount of increase in bike paths designated off street and on street, and all the signage and I think different pathways that have been growing, and that's been evident. But clearly with COVID and the concern about people taking subways and streetcars and being in close areas with high density and deciding to either walk or ride a bike has really ramped up that option. That's pushed it to another level, and it's true in a lot of cities, I think, all across North America.
Right. The other thing I think it's important to take note of is that in North America, we're finally putting in place the infrastructure for biking. The bike lanes, separated, at grade, off grade, all the different types of facilities. And it's interesting, part of the reason for that, I think, is that here in North America, because we're so car oriented, there's always this sort of what I'll call battle for the streets, between bikers and cars. Whereas if you look at places like Copenhagen or Amsterdam, or even places in China and Japan, the bike is integrated much more into the fabric of the personal transportation of those cities. And so you don't need all the green striping and the bollards and all of these things that we need here in order to keep bikers safe. And I think that's kind of the next level that we have to get to, where bikes are just part of the transportation mix.
Some cities are clearly doing that. In Toronto now, there's a number of streets that, like College Street, that is really building the infrastructure now for that. Right. A lot of other areas. So I think we're seeing that. Of course, that takes investment, it takes time, it takes an opportunity to put that in budgets and identify ways of doing that and implement it, because there's a cost that falls in line. Which leads me back to the thinking of when we first got involved in Detroit and helping to transform Detroit into a bike city, where it was obviously very car oriented for the longest time. And our work at Archive DS has been increasingly involved in in mobility development, both urban design and architecture, as we've worked on transit studies and transit projects and transit buildings, as well as non-motorized. And I think back to when we were hired years ago to look at Detroit's citywide non-motorized system, which really didn't have a plan at the time, and we were hired as part of the team to develop that plan. I recall thinking, wow, where could this go, and how much will this be embraced in transforming our largely car-oriented environment to allowing bikes to really be an integrated piece of the work. And I recall creating this transformation, the thought that we really had the infrastructure that allowed for biking. Right. And I think that was what Detroit had, and I think a lot of other cities have that too, which is wider streets than we really needed, less utilized streets than we really needed, which set the stage for our approach to redeveloping, or creating this non-motorized system.
And I think if you remember when we worked on the non-motorized plan, one of the key things about those wide streets was that all we needed to do was, as these streets were being maintained or repaved, you just incorporate into it new striping for the non-motorized facilities. And one of the key things that needed to happen, and is still in process, is rethinking the width of lanes. Simply taking them down from what was a standard 12 to 11 to 10, it gains enough space that you can start to add in these biking facilities that are so important to the city.
Yeah, and narrowing the lanes from 12 feet to 11 or 10 or even just even 1 foot also starts to push a driver's mentality to slow down a little bit.
Exactly.
So there's the combination of I think that the receptive driver to start to think about slowing down and being a little bit more attentive to maybe some of the other circumstances, adding crosswalks, which has increasingly been happening in cities,
Mm-hmm.
and then ultimately adding the non-motorized system. So you had sort of the combination of all those things that really transformed the situation.
Right.
And then from there, we actually put that into place, and the city took it over. The Department of Transportation and the city took that over, and then gladly they embraced it and promoted it, and before long started implementing a lot of these low-hanging transformational changes, which were basically striping the streets,
Right.
painting the streets to accommodate this, and hundreds of miles of bike lanes were created. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that was in the mid to late 2000s, and now here we are 10, 12, 15 years later, and I would consider Detroit to have a pretty substantial biking infrastructure now.
Yeah, definitely. And if you remember, we also incorporated the bicycling into the Complete Streets Master Plan for Woodward Avenue that we were hired to work on, just 5, 6, 7 years ago.
That's 27 miles through all of the city of Detroit, plus all of the sort of northern suburbs for 27 miles. And many people consider that one of the largest complete streets system or plans that's been done in all of North America.
And the biking infrastructure was a major component of that entire system. And I think that what we really need to keep in mind is that if you think about it up front, you can create quality environments. What you have to do is not have the car be the primary thing. There needs to be a balance, right? Some people go too far in the other direction, where it's only the needs of the bike that guides everything, and that can lead to some exaggerations in the perceived amount of space that you need to bicycle, or the overindulgence of paint, I'll say. The idea that you need painting everywhere, wherever you want to bike. And there's some situations where the best thing to do is to share the lane and to start to get drivers aware of bikes, as opposed to focus on, well, if I don't see a bike lane, I shouldn't see a biker. And that can be dangerous. So we need to think about that also.
Well, this is meant to be a relatively quick overview of the discussion about non-motorized. We could pick it up again and talk a lot more about what's been happening in other cities in North America, and the kinds of things that we see throughout Europe and other parts of the world, where there's some really innovative and interesting things happening, especially when it comes to parking bikes and parking decks for bikes and all these other things, which are really interesting.
The types of bikes.
And the types of bikes, that's another aspect. Would go back to my 2-wheel, 3-wheel point. But I think one of the things that we really learned, and I guess would be a great message to leave, at least in this discussion, is how simply you can transform a street by simply painting.
Exactly.
Using paint, very inexpensive. Rethinking the width that you have from curb to curb and thinking about it a little differently, painting things a little differently by way of how the lanes work out and what have you, and then adding potential bike lanes. A relatively simple and inexpensive change can really start to transform a street, a neighborhood, district, and we've seen that clearly here in Detroit, and in a lot of other cities as well. And I think it's one of those things where you just get out there and start a little bit, and it adds more and more, and before you know it, you have a system that's actually starting to work. And that was clearly a lesson that we saw with our experience here in Detroit, and we've now seen it in a lot of other places. And I think it's a good message to carry forward, that really any neighborhood, any city can really embrace this alternative. And we always say more mobility options is more freedom. I mean,
Mhm.
it's just really, why wouldn't you embrace that? So with that, it was just a brief overview of non-motorized discussion, and more to come at a future time.
And as we always say,
Walk
walk
the
the
streets.
streets.